Stone Brothers production.
Hey everyone, welcome back to our serial killer series from A through Z. We appreciate all the new viewers who stumbled across our page. If you are a returning viewer and haven't subscribed yet, please do so as it helps with the new subscriber system. It will turn from red to gray once you have subscribed and a bell icon will pop up on the right side. If you click that bell icon, you will be notified by the YouTube gods whenever we post. You can also help by following our Facebook and Instagram pages. For this episode, we are going to be discussing Michigan State's serial killers. You are in for a treat as this will be a two-part episode. This episode will have an unidentified serial killer and some well-known ones. Next episode will be the most infamous serial killers in Michigan State, so stay tuned for the episode. Now that I am done ranting and advertising our shameless plugs, enjoy the video everyone. Number 5. Leslie Allen Williams. Leslie Williams grew up around trauma and corruption during his youth. His mother, named Dorothy Williams, had 2 girls from her first marriage. His biological father, named Lyle Williams, was his mother's second husband, and she had 3 boys with him, including Leslie. Authorities in Garden City got a tip that his mother worked as a prostitute in her own home. There was an investigation on his father Lyle when neighborhood kids spotted out Dorothy's 2 daughters performing sex acts on their stepfather. Lyle confessed during his interview, stating he knew his wife was a prostitute because he watched Dorothy with her clients while peeping through a bedroom closet. They divorced in 1961 after Lyle was released from a 4-year sentence in the state hospital for the criminally insane in Ionia. In late 1959, Dorothy moved to California and met James Adams, whom she married in 1962. Their marriage was troubled and she filed for a divorce shortly after. The night before their hearing, James searched for his wife and shot her in the head. He killed himself because of the grief he felt, and the boys were sent to Milford, Michigan to live with their maternal grandparents. In 1970, Leslie Williams' criminal record started at 17 years old when he broke into a neighbor's home and was sentenced to probation for that crime. For the next 22 years, he was mostly either waiting on trial or serving prison time. He was convicted for an attempted breaking and entering, auto theft, assault with intent to commit murder, and first-degree sexual conduct. In 1983, Williams pleaded guilty for an assault crime with intent to commit kidnapping and assault with intent to sexually penetrate. He attempted this crime less than 2 weeks after he was paroled from prison. This time, Williams was charged as a habitual offender and he almost served life in prison. He was fortunate that the Oakland County Judge John O'Brien only sentenced him to 5 to 10 years for the assault conviction and 7 to 30 years for being a habitual offender. In 1990, life was looking up for Williams as he was paroled from prison after 7 years served because he received a positive recommendation from a therapist. On September 1991, Williams reported to his parole officers in the Corrections Department office on the western side of Detroit. One of his parole officers named William Manick said he had been a model parolee as he reported twice a month and showed check stubs to show he was working. Williams' parole was due to expire on August 1993 and Mannix added that he was doing well with no complaints from the surrounding community. On May 24, 1992, 38-year-old Williams was detained after someone had spotted him kidnapping a woman from a cemetery. Authorities rescued the woman from the trunk of his vehicle, and investigators said he denied committing any other crimes during his interrogation. A day after, the authorities received a tip that led them to the body of 18-year-old Cami Villanueva. Detectives said Williams led them to the bodies of 3 other adolescent girls he killed. In addition, he admitted to at least 11 sexual assaults and other crimes since he was paroled from prison in 1990. During an interview with the Flint Journal, Williams stated he knew right from wrong. He blamed his uncontrollable impulses that came from his childhood of sexual and physical abuse. Investigators reported that he kept a scorecard where he took note of his victim's physical appearance. Authorities discovered many items among his belongings, which included cloth patches, pins, films, matchbooks, and other items. Police found a ring in his belongings, which was Villanueva's. Also, investigators found a photo of two sisters whose names were Michelle and Melissa Urban. A fourth victim was identified as Cynthia Jones, and he would collect these souvenirs like how ordinary people keep up a collection of their own. Williams would rape and either strangled or stabbed his victims to death. In late 1992, Williams received a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving his time in Carson City Correctional Facility and probably will never get out of prison due to his deceptive nature. Number 4. Donald Gene Miller. Donald Miller was born on December 28, 1954, and grew up in a quiet middle-class neighborhood in East Lansing, Michigan. Miller grew up as a clean-cut, smart kid and served as a youth minister at his church. He went to a local college called Michigan State University, working towards a criminal justice degree, and played the trombone in the marching band. Miller dated a girl named Martha Sue Young, who went to his church. During the winter of 1976, Martha, who also went to MSU, became engaged with Miller. Just days before New Year's Eve, Martha had changed her mind about being engaged and broke it off with Miller, but he convinced her to stay with friends anyway. About 2 days later, Martha vanished. After her disappearance, authorities suspected Donald Miller as the suspect, but they couldn't find any evidence against him. After receiving his degree at MSU, 3 other women disappeared in an 18-month period from 1977 to 1978. Sometime in 1978, at the age of 23 in Lansing, Michigan, Miller raped a 14-year-old Lisa Gilbert and attempted to kill her. When her brother Randy arrived home, he tried killing him. Lisa was able to run out of her home to get help, and he was arrested soon after. Donald Miller's first known crime was for raping a minor and the attempted murder of Gilbert and her brother. During his trial, psychologists diagnosed Miller with psychotic paranoia. He tried pleading for insanity, but this diagnosis didn't help him, and he received 30 to 50 years in prison for those convictions. In July of 1979, after spending a year of his sentence, Miller confessed once again. He shared the stories of killing 4 East Lansing women, while one of them was his fiancée. Due to his voluntary confession, Miller somehow got a plea deal for these horrific crimes and only added 15 more years to the sentence he was already serving. The deal got finalized on August 29th of the same year, and Miller led authorities to the bodies of the women he had slain. The findings of the remains could finally allow the families of the victims to lay their lost loved ones to rest. Miller had been up for parole a few times, but the warden of the prison managed to find ways to revoke his good behavior credits. They used a strategy by finding any wrongdoings he had been a part of and random bunk checks for Miller's cell. This strategy helped keep him in prison because the CO found a cord-like device that could be used to strangle someone to death. With these findings, they were able to sentence Miller to another 20 to 40 years in prison. In February of 2017, Miller received a chance for parole after earning 10 years off his sentence for good behavior. Luckily, the judge ruled he was still too dangerous to society for his release from prison. Many victims' rights activists have fought to deny his parole opportunities. One person who is pushing in this fight is Sue Young. She was the mother of Miller's first victim, who was Martha Sue, and she had fought endlessly to keep Miller behind bars. According to the mother, he had attended the church with the family and he became a close family friend before dating her daughter. She added that he shouldn't be portrayed as a Christian or a decent human being. In 2018, Donald Miller had another opportunity to parole once again, but the fight to keep him in prison continues. Number 3. Rose Verez, aka the Witch of Delray. In the 1930s, Rose Verez was not admired in the small Hungarian enclave of Delray, which is on the south side of Detroit. Many neighbors on Medina Street considered her a witch that has no regard for human souls. Rose drew attention from authorities in Detroit for the first time in 1925 when 2 boarders died of acute alcohol poisoning. Rose was arrested for suspicion of murder and received questioning, but was released without getting any charges filed due to insufficient evidence. About 2 years later, her husband named Gabor Varese and a tenant named John Toth died suspiciously from carbon monoxide poisoning. Many neighbors refused to testify against her because they were afraid of her, and all stated, "We were afraid to catch her eye." They added, "She can make our children sick and our husbands lose their jobs." So when it was time for the Hungarians to state their depositions, they would say in broken English, "I don't verstek" or "me don't talk." The demographics started to change where she lived at, and her luck was about to run out. On August 25, 1931, 68-year-old Steve Mack fell off a ladder while working next to an attic window on the 3rd floor. A witness named George Hallis claimed that Mack was shoved off by a pair of arms, and then the perpetrator looked out through the window shortly after. An African-American named John Walker claimed to see him fall off the ladder. Walker told authorities that Rose admitted to killing Mack was a different circumstance than her first story. Also, Walker mentioned that Rose, her son William, and another tenant poisoned Mack and had beaten him. When he didn't die, they tossed him from the attic window, where a ladder was placed outside the house to appear like an accident. He lastly said Rose promised him $500 to keep his mouth shut about the incident. Medical examiners believed Walker's story because they found skull fractures and pointed out multiple injuries that wouldn't occur from a single fall from the ladder. They also found a blood-stained gas pipe in the basement of her home. There were many different stories surrounding his death, though Varese was still arrested after tying their statements together. 2 of her sons, 18-year-old William and 15-year-old Gabriel Varese, were interrogated along with 2 former lodgers. Ultimately, William was also charged with the murder as well. On August 31, 1931, nearly a week after the accident and countless hours of interrogation, Rose finally confessed to pushing Mack from the window for money she desperately needed. As authorities uncovered the truth in their investigation, they found out she had many husbands and innumerable amounts of insurance policies. It was earlier estimated that she had 50 policies, but in court testimony it was 75, which is a total of $70,000, naming her as the beneficiary. With the investigation finished, there were at least 12 suspicious deaths, including Mack. Multiple sources state the deaths as followed. John Toth died from carbon monoxide poisoning, Steve Fiash died from alcohol poisoning, and John Colaci died from an intestinal ailment, and many others. After a short trial, sometime in October 1931, Rose and her son William Varese were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. In May 1944, William was granted a retrial even though it wasn't specified in the newspaper articles. Prosecutor Julian McIntosh requested for the charges against William to be dismissed, stating that most of the necessary witnesses could not be found for a retrial. Judge John Scollin dismissed the charges against him soon after, and he was released to the public. In October 1944, Rose had Miss Aileen Cutts file a motion for retrial like her son. Cutts stated the reason for a motion was because she didn't understand English at the time of her arrest and trial. She added that Judge Cotter wasn't in the courtroom at the time a verdict was returned. In turn, John granted a retrial on April 16, 1945. John Walker testified the same exact story as he explained in the first trial. Marie Chavala also testified what she witnessed of Mack's fatal fall. However, when Bessie Hill was called upon to testify, she denied her testimony from the initial trial, despite the judge criticizing her reversal and notified her of the penalties of perjury. Rose testified in her own defense with the help of an interpreter to translate her language in English. After only 14 years served in prison, Rose was acquitted and released from prison on December 11, 1945. Number 2. Benjamin Tony Atkins, aka the Woodward Corridor Killer. Benjamin Atkins was born on August 26, 1968 in Detroit, Michigan, and suffered from trauma as a child. In court, it was known that he was abandoned by the young age of 2 years old, raped by the age of 10, and forced to watch his mother turn tricks in the front seat of a car. Benjamin was also described as a homosexual, possibly due to his upbringing, though this is merely speculations from his interrogations and court proceedings. He carried out a series of rapes and murders for about 9 months before evidently being captured. Let's discuss what the FBI and other sources heard of the killings before Atkins was taken into custody. FBI investigators acknowledged that Atkins amassed the greatest number of victims in such a vast time for that era. At first, his crimes came unnoticed as the murders took place in a high-risk environment where this stuff was common with little police and media attention. The area called Highland Park was notoriously known for drugs, gang violence, and prostitution. As bodies started to mount up, a task force of investigators from Highland Park, Detroit, Michigan State Police, and the FBI was assembled on the case. They started heavy surveillance in the area, talked to locals, prostitutes, and homeless people who were often present. As clues unfolded, one of the prostitutes had been beaten and raped by Atkins, but she managed to escape before he could execute her. Her name was Darlene Saunders, and she finally reported the attack to the detectives that questioned her with the other prostitutes active in the area. Darlene described her attacker and said she only knows him as Tony, who is Benjamin Atkins' middle name. Atkins was finally taken in for his crimes and was convinced to spill his guts because of Detective Sergeant Ronald Sanders. He said, "You never had a father." Sanders continued saying, "I have a son exactly your age when you were abandoned, and you need to get this off your chest. Just talk to me about it." Atkins told Sanders the truth as he worked his way through 5 cheeseburgers and confessed to the murders while including one victim that he had hidden in a secret basement beneath an unoccupied garage. 11 bodies of victims were found as followed. The victims were crammed upside down in shower stalls in abandoned motels, flung atop of box springs and piles of garbage in empty rooms of vacant buildings. He also hid other women's corpses around the abandoned Highland apartments. After all of Benjamin's confessions in court, it amounted up to 87 pages long. Victims' families despised him, and other jurors felt bad for his childhood, hoping that no other children experienced what happened to him as he grew up. Society cannot be blamed for these deaths, but Benjamin Atkins should have gotten help before he escalated to murder and rape. He was also known as the Woodward Corridor Killer and was found guilty for 11 victims. Ben was due to serve 11 life terms, though he didn't because he died in prison from an infection caused by HIV. This goes to show you should stay safe and wear protection, everyone. Number 1. The Oakland County Child Killer. From February 15, 1976 to March 16, 1977, an unidentified serial killer called the Babysitter Killer murdered 4 or more children in the Oakland County, Michigan area. One of the first known victims was 12-year-old Mark Stebbins from Ferndale. He was last seen leaving an American Legion Hall on February 15, 1976 on a Sunday afternoon. Unfortunately, 2 days later, his body was spotted in a snowbank near a parking lot of an office building on 10 Mile Road and Greenfield in Southfield, Michigan. Stebbins had strangulation marks and was sexually assaulted with an object while he received 2 laceration marks to the back left side of his head. There were visible rope marks around his wrists and ankles indicating he had been bound throughout his abduction. On December 22, 1976, around the Royal Oaks area, 12-year-old Jill Robinson had an argument with her mother while preparing for dinner, so she ran away. Authorities thought it was only a runaway case, thinking that she would turn up, so they didn't mark it as an abduction. The next day, Robinson's bicycle was found in a hobby store on Main Street in Royal Oak, Michigan. After Christmas Day, her body was found covered in snow along Interstate 75 near Big Beaver Road in Troy, Michigan, in sight of the Troy Police Department. The unknown killer had blown Robinson's face in half with a 12-gauge shotgun. Only a week later, 10-year-old Christine Mahalich went missing around 3 p.m. after purchasing a magazine at a 7-Eleven on 12 Mile Road in Berkeley, Michigan. Her mother reported her missing 3 hours after she disappeared and went on local television begging for the suspect to let her daughter go. The family's neighbors even raised $17,000 in hopes that the money could be used as ransom for the release of Christine. 19 days later, a mailman found Christine's body fully dressed on the side of a rustic road in Franklin Village. The unknown killer put Christine's hands on her chest in a typical funeral pose, and her body was discovered less than 24 hours after she was killed. The last known victim of the Oakland child killer was 11-year-old Timothy King. On March 16, 1977, Tim was left home alone since his two brothers were busy and his sister was on a date. His parents had gone dining out with a client from his dad's law firm. They were certain their son would be fine home alone for a short time since they were close by. Around 7:30 p.m., Tim asked to borrow 30 cents from his older sister as she was about to leave. He also told her to crack the front door open for him as well since he was shopping for some candy. He left his home in Birmingham with a skateboard in hand and picked up some candy at his local drugstore near Maple Road. Around 8:30 p.m., Tim left the store through the back entrance. This is when two witnesses spotted a man with long, shaggy dark hair and sideburns approach him in the parking lot. This was the last time they saw Tim alive, and all of Oakland County soon flew into panic mode. A huge search was executed for Tim around the entire Detroit metropolitan area, and there was widespread media coverage. Tim's father, named Barry King, begged to release his son unharmed. Detroit News printed a letter about Marion King, writing that she hoped Timothy could come home so she could serve his favorite meal, being Kentucky Fried Chicken. On the late evening of March 22, 1977, two teenagers in a vehicle spotted out Tim's body in a shallow ditch next to Gill Road. His skateboard was placed next to his body, which had his clothes neatly pressed and folded on top of it. An autopsy revealed that he had been suffocated to death and sexually assaulted with an object. Further, it had revealed that Timothy ate fried chicken right before he was killed and had been suffocated 6 hours before his body was found. Other victims were abducted and murdered around the Oakland County area during the same time. Unfortunately, some of these victims did not tie in with the other four due to variations in the case. After getting a brief profile of the killer after the disappearance of Timothy, a task force checked out more than 18,000 tips. The task force disbanded in 1978 after failing to arrest or charge a suspect, and over the years, some victims' families criticized the police investigation. This resulted in 24 arrests on unrelated charges and a multi-state child pornography ring bust that was operating on North Fox Island in Lake Michigan. One suspect people thought as the killer was Christopher Bush. He had sexually violated a teenager named Vincent Gunnels on May 7, 1976 in a cabin near S Lake. Christopher's father was a top executive at General Motors, and Christopher had been in police custody shortly before Timothy's disappearance. On November 1978, Bush was found dead in his apartment. Investigators ruled his death as a suicide from a gunshot wound, even though there was no discharge residue on his hands. A search of his apartment revealed a terrifying drawing of a screaming child that resembled one of the victims, named Mark Stebbins. The King family reported that the ligature marks found on the scene were missing, and there is no sign of it being documented in the case files. In 2012, Oakland County Prosecutor Jessica Cooper announced in a press conference that Archad Sloan, who is a convicted pedophile, became a person of interest in the murders. Cooper added that hair found in his 1966 Pontiac Bonneville matches the DNA profile of hairs found on the two male victims. Sloan was mentioned by others that he would loan his car to pedophile friends. After many years had passed, Sloan received a life sentence for the rape of a young boy in 1983. He remained behind bars but wasn't convicted for the murders. There were other suspected killers like John Wayne Gacy, but according to DNA tests in 2013, Gacy was uninvolved in the Oakland County killings. Another top suspect in the murders was Ted Lamborghini, who is believed to have been involved in a child porn ring in the 1970s. Instead of taking a polygraph test for a reduced sentence on the murder cases, Ted pleaded guilty to 15 sex-related charges that involved young boys. On October 2007, Mark Stebbins' family filed a wrongful death lawsuit but wasn't linked or charged with the death of Stebbins. Investigators reopened the case in 2012 as they continue searching for the suspect, while the police believe there could be more victims out there. Thank you everyone for watching our video. Those who watched it all the way to the end, you rock and we appreciate you. Leave us a comment below if you have encountered any of these killers or just want to share an idea with us. Also, leave a like and add us to your favorite playlist because it goes a far way with reaching other eyes. Those who enjoyed our content and want to help us further, there will be a Patreon link below in the description. Any donations help us out as we're literally making pennies for our content due to the new ad system. Later, we will be having perks on there so you can get some bonus features and content like stickers, personal live streams, and much more. We love how much our channel has grown in the past year and a half. Keep up the good work and share our content with others who are also interested too. We thank you and love you. Stay tuned for the next part of our Michigan episode as it will be packed with the craziest people you have ever seen. Take care everyone. Stone Brothers signing out.